This is NTV.
Thanks for our viewers for joining us. I'm Karagaba, Baldwins, and we're coming to you live from the Kampala International Conference Center. We bring you a very pertinent discussion. There's an excitement in the country about the national oil treasure that has been discovered and is yet, of course, to become commercialized. And tonight, we're going to discuss an entity that has been set up to manage and administrate this particular treasure, and that is the Uganda National Oil Company. Let's have this introduction just to proceed on to the direct discussion in the studio.
International petroleum industry, also known as the oil industry or the oil patch, includes the global processes of exploration, extraction, refining, transporting, often by oil tankers and pipelines, and marketing of petroleum products. The largest volume of products of the industry are fuel oil and gasoline or petrol. Petroleum is also the raw material for many chemical products, including pharmaceuticals, solvents, fertilizers, pesticides, synthetic fragrances, and plastics. The extreme monetary value of oil and its products has led to it being known as black gold. The industry is usually divided into three major components, which are upstream, midstream, and downstream. Uganda has 6.5 billion barrels of oil reserves located mostly on its western border with the Democratic Republic of Congo. At least 1.4 billion of those reserves are estimated to be economically recoverable. French firm Total, SA, Chinese firm China National Offshore Oil Corporation or UNOC, and UK firm Tullow have production licenses to develop Uganda's oil reserves for export. On April 10th, the Albertine Graben Refinery Consortium, a US-led group of companies, including General Electric, YAATRA Africa or Yatra Africa, and the Italian engineering firm Saipem SPA, officially won the right to finance, build and operate an oil refinery that is worth approximately $3 billion in Uganda, signing a project framework agreement with the government of Uganda. The infrastructure required to develop Uganda's oil sector is estimated to cost several $billion, and major construction in the up, mid and downstream components of the sector is projected by the government to begin soon in 2019. On May 19, 2017, the presidents of Uganda and Tanzania signed an agreement over construction terms for a 1,400-kilometer heated oil export pipeline from western Uganda to Tanzania's Indian Ocean port of Tanga, but development remains stalled as the two governments negotiate the transit tariff. Considering the high importance of this sector, NTV in conjunction with Uganda National Oil Company or UNOC bring you a crucial discussion on the elaborate status of Uganda's oil and gas sector, specifically focusing on the role play of UNOC. You're welcome.
I'm Karagaba, Baldwins once again, and on our social media platforms we've posted a question asking you that the Uganda government set up this company. Do you think this will give assurance of value for the investment made to the benefit of all the citizens in Uganda? And on Twitter, just two responses. Talemwa Ryan says, never have I, or else will I ever trust in beneficiary of Uganda's minerals. Then Silver 2 says that what of Uganda Airways? It could also, okay, that's pretty divergent from the discussion. And then on Facebook, I have Clifford who says, we need to first know who heads it first and from which region. Then we can start from there. Thank you. Angel K, she says, maybe it is going to help the people in parliament. They speak well while on TV, but no action in our local villages. Ugandans, we need backup. And please continue on that particular engagement. I'll keep on setting up your responses. And right now, let me go into the studio discussion with a magnificent panel that is going to deal with this particular matter. On my extreme left, I have Michael Mugerwa. He's the General Manager, Uganda National Oil Company. Michael, you're welcome.
Thank you.
And in the middle, I have Peter Muliisa, Chief Legal Officer, UNOC.
Thank you. Okay,
straight away, in your hearing the responses, there's some kind of skepticism about the viability of the industry itself, but also the relevance of the company. So just, Michael, help us to understand the background of this particular company, the way it was set up.
Okay, so we were established, the Uganda National Oil Company was established under the Petroleum Act, Upstream Acts and Midstream Acts of 2013, incorporated as a private limited company, owned by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, as well as the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. So that's basically how we came into existence, via an act. Our mandate is to hold and manage the state's commercial and business interests in the petroleum subsector. And we are also mandated to develop in-depth expertise in the oil and gas sector. We have a vision to be an innovative and profitable company operating across the value chain that was talked about earlier in the presentation, to the benefit of all Ugandans. So when we talk about petroleum value chain, you have the upstream, and so our activities there include state participation in the projects you outlined earlier in your introduction, launching new ventures, as well as exploration and production. In midstream, we have pipeline, the East African crude oil pipeline, for example. We have the refinery, and downstream we have terminals. So that kind of encompasses a lot of what we're doing. Our mission short term, in let's say the next 5 years, is to develop sustainable growth in the oil and gas sector, and we're working on this through strategic partnerships, as well as championing national participation. So I hear a lot of the questions there about, how is this going to benefit Ugandans? We're very focused on capacity building. We're very focused on capacity building of companies as well as individuals, making sure that they get up to speed technically, but eventually they'll also need exposure. So it's not just the academics and the training, but it's also the exposure to operating environments in the upstream, midstream and downstream. So that's in a nutshell what we're about.
Yeah, we will get into deeper discussion about the benefit aspects to the citizenry. And so, Peter, you have the National Oil and Gas Policy, which has set up 3 agencies, which seem to be literally just replicating each other's responsibility, but perhaps you can explain it better. The policy sets up the Directorate of Petroleum, then the Petroleum Authority, and UNOC. So what is the difference?
Thank you, Baldwin. And I think it's a very good question, because I go to places and most people can't differentiate between Uganda National Company, Petroleum Authority of Uganda, and the Director of Petroleum. So let me just explain what we do. Michael has clearly explained what UNOC does. We are the commercial arm of the state in the oil and gas sector. So what we do is we manage all commercial aspects of oil and gas sector on behalf of the state. So we operate across the value chain, the petroleum value chain. So we have assets upstream, midstream and downstream, as Michael has explained it. So we typically commercial. We are a private limited liability company that is run like any other company, with target as profit. And of course, because we have the state nature in us, we look at profit, but also sustainability of the development of the resource, as well as capacity building in the country to ensure that Ugandans participate in the sector and benefit from the sector. So those are the additional drivers, but we are largely driven by profit like any other private limited liability company. So in the sector, we play as Total plays, as Talo plays, as UNOC plays, as companies that are run by boards, very competent boards, to get a profit for our shareholders. And our shareholders, Michael has outlined them as the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Energy. So basically government. And when you talk about government, you're talking about Ugandans. So we're a company for Ugandans. Now, that's what we do. We are commercial, a private limited liability company, and that's what we do. Now, Petroleum Authority of Uganda is the regulator. So they regulate us. It's like I would say UCC regulates the media and communications. So we are regulated by the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. So the Petroleum Authority of Uganda regulates upstream and midstream. Downstream is regulated differently as of today. So that's the difference. For them, they make sure that whatever we do, UNOC, Total, Sinuk, Talo, the new entrants that have just been given licenses, that we run our operations in accordance with the law. And among other things, of course, is are you following the environmental laws? Are you following the license requirements? Are you following national content requirements? So that's what they do. They regulate. And when we don't follow rules, which of course we don't, we follow rules absolutely, they are happy to come out and say this is the sanction for not following the rules. So they regulate. Now, the ministry, through the Department of Petroleum, has retained the strategic direction of the industry. So the ministry handles the policy and licensing of the sector. So policy basically is what goes to Parliament to become a law or regulation. And that is originated by the ministry, managed through the sector, and then taken to Parliament. In terms of licensing, the ministry has the mandate to market our prospects. And of course, recently you've heard
Marketing them to who?
To the international community, to have oil companies interested in our basins. You might know that the Albertine Graben is not fully licensed. I think it's 10% of it that is licensed. So there is still more areas in the Albertine Graben that should be licensed and explored, and probably more crude found. We have other basins like the Moroto Kadama Basin. So all those have to be promoted, licensed, and then we have exploration happen, and probably crude found and developed and produced. So that's the role of the ministry. It has to go out there and market our basins, market our prospects, and have them licensed, explored, developed, and produced. On the other bit, the ministry also, of course, negotiates agreements like the production sharing agreements, which is part of licensing, agreements for the midstream, like the project financing, project framework agreement we signed with the refinery group. So that is still the role of the ministry. So in a nutshell, or in the so many words I have used, that's the difference between the three entities.
Okay, so
and
the Petroleum Authority is for policy purposes, ministry
no,
is
the Petroleum Authority regulates.
Regulates, is a regulator.
Is
okay,
a regulator.
Ministry is for policy.
For policy.
Then
the UNOC
is for commercial purposes.
Thank
okay,
you. Yes.
Just concluding the profiling.
Yes.
What is the structure of this particular company? Because I can see, as you alluded, the shareholding is the Ministry of Energy has 51%, Ministry of Finance has 49%, and each of those shares is 1 million, shillings 1 million, meaning you have quite a hefty sum that is supposed to be invested here. So what is the structuring of the organization, of the company itself, just briefly? So in terms of management, in terms of oversight.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of oversight, we have a board of directors, all of whom were appointed by His Excellency the President. And I believe that's 7 members in that board, with a chairperson. And underneath that board of directors, we have an executive management committee, of which 2 are present with you. Essentially, between the board and the executive management of committee, that is how the company is steered. We have a clear strategy that is outlined, that I outlined earlier. We have a number of strategic themes over the next 5 years, looking for strategic partners being one, investing in people being another important theme, as well as building the business, because we are a brand new company. I mean, we're 2.5 years old. We're essentially a startup company. So we've got a lot on our plate over the next little while, let's say 2-3 years. In addition, we have 2 wholly owned subsidiaries. One of them is the National Pipeline Company, that's responsible for pipelines and terminals, again in a nutshell. And then you have the Uganda Refinery Holding Company, that is responsible for the refinery and the petrochemicals business, which includes the Kabale Industrial Park. So each of these 2 entities will essentially spawn off special purpose vehicles with joint venture partners in various areas as we move forward, in new ventures in particular. And I guess in the case of the the pipeline, there's something called this, for the state participation, there's a back-end, but that's something that Peter can talk to in more detail.
Yeah. Let me just play with the help of my production team a video that exemplifies the same kind of company that Qatar has, the Qatar Petroleum Authority, just about
interesting.
And then we shall proceed on with that. Let my team just play that clip to help us get the vision of what this company would be in reflection to Qatar.
As you see, the discovery of gas literally transformed our country overnight, helping us realize the national vision and giving us a proud and secure future. Set up in 1974, today Qatar Petroleum looks after all aspects of our oil and gas industry, with over 75 companies and joint ventures working in closely related areas. Today, Qatar's exploration and production of oil and natural gas makes us one of the most important energy suppliers in the world. Our industrial cities, like Ras Laffan and Mesaid, are built to serve Qatar's future needs, enabling growth downstream. To supply our near neighbors, the giant Dolphin pipeline was then built on the seabed. By designing giant LNG vessels, we devised an ingenious way of transporting huge quantities of the gas around the world.
That is the exemplification of what the Uganda National Oil Company is seeking up to be, the vision for this nation on the prospects of the treasure of oil and petroleum in this land. And still on our social media platforms, I just want to keep updating you on your responses. And I'm seeing here Robert on Facebook, Kimogi saying that based on that question we posted asking whether you think that the investment in this particular company is going to be of benefit to all citizens. And you say that, but are we sure whether the oil is really down there or it's one of those incompetent exploration that gave us false information, just like what this government is good at? Felix Cheyune says, no way. What's going to be done is to see top officials in this agency earning exorbitant salaries, and above all, they are all related to ruling class under their scheme nepotism, as we all know, UNRWA, URA, UBRA, and so on. And Michael, exactly on that particular sentiment that you're getting, UNOC got about 15 billion Uganda shillings in the previous budget. You had a supplement of 14 billion. And if you see the wage breakdown, rather the recurrent expenditure breakdown, by September last year, you had 9.5 something billion of wages, non-wage 5.6, and yet you get a supplement. So somebody says that this company is actually just up for nothing but to benefit just a few top officials and perhaps government-related individuals who are interested in just exploiting this particular resource. So tell us the achievements of UNOC as of now. About 3 years.
Achievements to date.
And in relation to our money.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll start. Let me start from an area where I'm very familiar with, which is the refinery, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
In terms of achievements, the Ministry of Energy initiated a process of trying to understand from the international marketplace those that might be interested to invest invest, build, and then eventually operate a refinery in Uganda. They went from about 40 different consortia and whittled it down eventually to a handful. Eventually we negotiated and came to an agreement with a single consortium, which you talked about earlier, the Albertine Graben Refinery Consortium, that is General Electric led. After that PFA was signed, we moved into the project implementation mode. So that essentially means is that we started moving down the road of trying to define what the refinery configuration would be. That's critical because we have to look at it also from the perspective of what Uganda currently consumes in terms of petroleum products. And you're looking into the future. You're looking, 5 years from now, before such a refinery will be up and running. And so you have to balance your forecasts with what you see is possible in terms of, from a technical perspective, what you can be producing. You also got to look further in terms of the petrochemical ambitions that Uganda has. As you showed in your video earlier, Qatar isn't just producing gas and other petroleum products. They've also gone into petrochemicals, into the value chain. What we've managed to do in this relatively brief period of time, 2.5 years of our existence, is in this particular area, is essentially figure out what type of refinery we want to have. And I think later on we'll be talking about the specifics of the refinery development.
The different streams.
So what type and how it meets the market needs look going forward, and also looking forward to our petrochemical ambitions.
Yeah, Michael, but don't you get concerned if somebody looks at the figures and sees that the wage bill is far more exponential than the actual expenditure of capex input of this whole particular investment that has been put in by both the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Energy? Doesn't that concern you? Because that is the reflection in the records that were issued out about your budget performance, that you have about 9.5 billion for wages, for wage bill and non-wage bill payments of about 5 point something, and then you get a supplement of 14 billion. Does that concern you?
It doesn't concern me because I know how the money is being spent. First, if you're looking at human capital, if you go to each of these oil companies that you mentioned in your introduction, they're all paying internationally competitive wages, salaries and wages. It is very difficult for Uganda National Oil Company, or any national oil company for that matter, to compete without meeting, let's say, some way that level of wage that you're seeing being paid by the national oil companies to Ugandan nationals. I'm not talking about what they pay in New York or Paris. I'm talking about what is paid in Uganda. So you have to be competitive, otherwise you don't get don't get the human capital, and they end up going elsewhere.
Okay.
So that's one thing. The other thing is that we are implementing projects. So each of these projects requires there's a lot of activities. For example, environmental social impact assessments. We've got to hire advisors to make sure that Uganda gets the best deal when we're negotiating the refinery or pipeline or any other of these very major ventures. So we have considerable bills associated with advisory, for example. Okay. So you've got to put these things in perspective. It isn't just a...
So let's go to the specifics. There's a mentioning, if you're there as a viewer, you've heard of upstream, midstream, and downstream. And Peter, so let's start with the upstream, which is, I guess, exploration. I think midstream is about refinery, making sure that the product is commercially viable, and then the downstream, which we shall talk about, storage and distribution. So the state participation, so for UNOC being Tilenga project with several partners and being having Kingfisher development area, I think this is where the exploration expertise is and the engagement. We need to understand how what capacity UNOC has and how sustainably and successfully possible you're going to manage this particular upstream level.
Okay, thank you, Baldwin. And I think your question aligns with just what Michael was answering. If to have capacity to manage this very difficult subject, you need to be able to attract competent and experienced people, and that will cost you money. But we are also investing in very many projects, upstream, midstream, and downstream. that will bring a lot of revenue to this country. So in essence, the investment our shareholders are putting in is not sunk. We shall return a profit, and a big profit. But as Michael stated, the refinery, the industrial park will create significant push or support to the development agenda of this country.
Let's first deal with the exploration aspect.
But
Is the
let me
exploration
just run back to the
upstream
question.
aspect?
So in upstream, currently we manage 15% state participation interest in the Tilenga project, which is the northern fields that sit in Muliisa, Noya, that northern part, and as well in the Kingfisher development area, which is in the south in Hoima. So what we do is we sit with Total, with UNOC, with Talo, and we look out, we attend meetings, we manage budgets with them, we do everything that is required to be done to ensure that the government commercial interests are protected. And that's what we do under state participation. But still, because upstream is exploration, development, and production, and we realize, as you stated earlier in the introduction, that we have 6.5 billion barrels. By the way, to just answer the person on Twitter, this is confirmed, this is there, it is real, and this is going to be extracted. What I would urge that viewer is to actually get ready to participate and benefit from these projects. So we have realized that 6.5 billion barrels is probably good, but we could do more based on the resource we have and the prospects that we know. So we think we need to have an aggressive exploration campaign to add more volumes to those 6.5 and produce more and for longer, and ensure that the refinery and the pipeline continue working at full capacity. So what we are doing as UNOC is we have applied for a license from the minister to start exploration on our own, working of course with the strategic partners, to just contribute to that agenda of adding more volumes that will be utilized by the refinery and the pipeline. We also intend to apply for a second license. The law allows us to apply directly under the Upstream Act. So we can apply directly without going through a licensing round. But the ministry is also organizing a licensing round to encourage foreign entities to come in, and we have another exploration round. So the idea is to ensure that all the crude that we have, all that is explored and is found and is lifted from the ground. So upstream, that's what UNOC is doing. We are managing the state participation, but also ensuring that we get into exploration to add more volumes to the crude that has been found.
Great. Can't dig much deeper in there, otherwise we will sleep there. Midstream, yes. And you alluded to it. You have subsidiary companies, which is URHC, which is Uganda Refinery Holding Company Limited, and the National Pipeline Company Limited. And so they do different things. Of course, this one is very specific, refinery, the other one the pipeline. Just help us to understand the performance that has been registered by these particular two subsidiaries that you're mentioning here that are in the midstream. Yes. Yeah.
So with respect to the refinery holding company that you asked about there, there are two main activities. One is the refinery work that I think I'd outlined to you earlier, high level, that we've signed a project framework agreement, and that project framework agreement is under implementation, and that is essentially planning and raising the finance for the refinery project. With respect to the industrial park, we are essentially, well, first of all, maybe I should give some details on that park.
Yes.
The Kabale Industrial Park is roughly 3,000 hectares of land, or 30 square kilometers of land, that was acquired by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development on behalf of the government of Uganda. And in that park, we're going to locate the, it has already been decided what's going to be located there. But specifically, there's the international airport, what's currently known as the Kabale International Airport, or to be somewhat controversial, you can call it the Hoima International Airport, but that's under construction. And that is let's say at 22% progress, that project. It started, they mobilized at site at the end of 2017, and it should be ready early 2021, essentially about 4 years well, end of 2021, 4 years of construction for that airport. On either side of the airport, we have a heavy industrial zone that's planned, and you have a light medium industry zone that's under planning. In the heavy industrial zone, we'll have the refinery. We'll also have the crude oil export hub. So that is where pump station number 1 on the journey of our oil to Tanga will be located. There will be a total of 6 pump stations along that route, as well as 2 pressure reducing stations. But this key facility, pump station number 1, will also be the receiving point for the 2 feeder pipelines that come from the northern Tilenga fields and the southern Kingfisher fields. So just from those 3 projects, so the pipeline projects that connects to the upstream, the refinery itself, as well as the airport, you can see that this is going to be the most complex, I would say, industrial park that we have in this country. It's also intended to be the most advanced, because we're also going to work on petrochemical possibilities as well as fertilizers. And what I was trying to say earlier about the refinery configuration is that not only has it been selected with a view to what Uganda's expected petroleum product demand will be, split up between say diesel, petrol and jet fuel, as well as gas. But we're also looking forward to what kind of petrochemicals do we want to produce as a country. So very specifically, we're looking at a monomer called propylene that enables us to produce plastics, and that can be produced within the configuration that has been selected. In addition, we'll be able to produce nitrogen-based fertilizers. You may have heard of the Sukulu project in the east of the country. That's a phosphate-based fertilizer project. And I think probably 70 to 80% of our viewers understand some aspect of farming. And so when you talk about fertilizers, you're looking at nitrogen, phosphates, and you're looking at phosphorus, and you're looking at potassium as well, the so-called NPK formula. So Uganda will be in the position to produce not just phosphates, which are basically mineral-based, but nitrogen-based fertilizers, which are urea, ammonia, that we can produce in that park. In addition, we're going to be developing, looking forward to what that airport can bring in terms of opportunities. We're bringing in oil and gas-related logistics supplies over time, but those flights need to leave with some goods in them. And currently the model that is looked at is agricultural exports. So again, we're thinking beyond oil here, but we're thinking that our agricultural sector needs to be thinking in terms of fresh produce exports, agro-processed exports, such as what's exported, for example, from Entebbe currently, or from Nairobi, or even Kigali, from those airports. So there's an agro-processing aspect that will also be developed within the industrial park.
Okay, so it's beyond the oil.
And then, of course, in terms of light medium industry, there's a lot of the support industries that are required for the operation and maintenance of a refinery, operation and maintenance of the upstream central processing facilities, and so on and so forth. Within that park, we also foresee commercial developments, as well as the residential training facilities, even medical centers, because that region is going to attract, or that part of our country is going to attract not just many Ugandans will be moving into that region just because of the job opportunities that come up.
Okay, great. I wanted us to maybe for you just to shed some light on the East African oil crude refinery pipeline, but I think is it pipeline, not refinery? But I do not have time on that. Let me just get to Michael about Peter. Sorry, about now the downstream storage aspect. Was the national pipeline company is expected to develop, to manage and operate downstream storage terminals to cushion the country from petroleum product supply disruption. So how are you intending to do that? The storage of refined products in this regard.
Thank you, Baldwin. Briefly, really, we have...
and the security.
Yes. So security of supply of refined products is every country's concern, and every country puts in place intervention measures to ensure that its refined product supply, security of supply is secured. So in Uganda, what we've done, we have a terminal in Jinja that has 30 million capacity, the Jinja storage terminal. It's small, but it's
30 million what?
30 million liters
Okay.
capacity. It's very small for all our needs, because our consumption per day is now moving towards 6 million liters of refined products per day. So that means that facility full gives us only 6 days. Of course, the law requires that the the marketing companies like Vivo, Total, and the others maintain 10 days supply of their market share. So in total, you could say we have the requirements on the OMCs, the oil marketing companies, the Jinja storage terminal. We have 16 days of supply if anything happened. That's really little. So what we're doing as the Uganda National Company is we've acquired land through the Ministry of Energy. The land was acquired and handed over to us to develop 10 kilometers north of Kampala on Mutiana Road. And we're going to build a storage terminal there of about 240 million liters capacity. We think that gives us sufficient security, but it will also become a distribution center for our forward markets like South Sudan, Eastern DRC, and so that will help us. That storage terminal will have will be connected to the refinery through a pipeline, a 211-kilometer pipeline from Hoima to this place up here called Namwambra on Mutiana Road. So that is in storage. We think once we have that storage terminal, which is going to be commercially profitable for us and the country, but it will also bring in security of supply. We'll have at least up to 240 million liters. When you add on Jinja, then you have about 270 million liters. Because our demand is growing at about 9% per annum. So we need really big storage terminals, and we are developing that. Currently, we have put out an EOI for
EOI is what?
Expression of interest and a request for tender to get a strategic partner to develop this terminal with, and we think by the end of this year we'll have the partner and we'll start on commercializing and developing that terminal. So that should help. But let me touch a little bit on the pipelines as well.
Yeah,
because,
just 1 minute.
Yes,
So
because the East African crude oil pipeline that is going to take our crude, we are going to be involved, and we're going to hold 15% in the special purpose vehicle that will develop it. So that is another project that our midstream national pipeline company is handling. And of course, as we grow and the demands grow and we find more crude, we will develop other pipelines. And that subsidiary has that mandate. So on that front, that's what we are doing. We're also working on ensuring that we are able to bring in products from Kisumu via the lake to reduce on the cost of transportation of products to Uganda. And we're in advanced stages of making sure that that happens. And once we start that process, we think that the cost of transportation will reduce and it should be beneficial to Ugandans.
Okay, so let me go for a break. Very brilliantly really explained in this matter. In as much as the subject is pretty wide, I can't dig far deep, otherwise we will sleep here, which is no one's interest. Thanks our viewers for keeping with us. Let's go for a break and we'll be right back. Thanks for keeping with us. We're in our last segment where we're concluding our discussion on the Uganda National Oil Company. And we've posted another question on our social media platforms asking that how would you wish for this particular newfound wealth to be managed and administered, of course, to the greater benefit of the nation. And very interesting opinions. Let me just cite out three. Achel Elisa says, it's my oil and gas not for Uganda, and why do you want to know? Maybe I should give you some, but sorry, I won't. It's a very disguised comment, and I do not comprehend it quite well. Kigundu Patrick says, they've already decided all the oil money will be kept in America, so why these questions? It's believed we will need to borrow that money annually as we pay back to the bank for loaning if with no terms but a small interest. I hope my technocrats here are hearing what this whole response is. And lastly, Tim Kenya says, why waste our time? Answer this question. It's not a wastage of time. You need to contribute. Lastly, Marie says, who am I to decide and who will consider my opinion? At least post your opinion and show that you are interested in this particular wealth. Michael, Peter, you're hearing this kind of very vicious and kind of passionate response. Help the viewers to understand how the local people, the ordinary citizen, is going to benefit from this whole thing, because that is the outcry out there. People are extremely skeptical that this all is to benefit an ordinary person.
Thank you, Baldwin. I'll just highlight 2 points. That the management of the resource is through acts of parliament that were really debated and eventually passed and benchmarked on the best practices in the world, learning from countries that have not managed their resources very well. So I personally believe that the legal structure that we have, the fiscal structure that we have, is among the best in the world. And it's just not my opinion. The World Bank has said the same. The IMF has said the same. So what I would urge Ugandans to do is to just understand that legal regime, understand how oil money will be brought through the sale of crude, where it will go and how it will be managed. And it is a very well-structured way of managing that resource to ensure that it benefits Ugandans who are here today and the future generation that will come. And so I would want to comfort all Ugandans out there that the structure we have is excellent, is very good in managing the resources. And it was passed by our MPs who represent us. So our views were heard and they were considered. Then moving to how Ugandans will benefit, which I think is so important. We have 2 laws, the Upstream Act and the Midstream Act, and national content regulations under them. What national content basically means is Ugandans participating in the sector to provide goods, to provide services, and to be employed. So these laws basically require that every company involved in oil and gas, upstream, midstream, must consider Ugandans first, Ugandan companies first, Ugandan goods and services first. And if those goods don't exist or services don't exist in Uganda, that's when you look outside of Uganda. So Ugandans basically have the first priority. So what is important for us now, and what we are doing as UNOC, PAU, Petroleum Authority of Uganda, and the ministry and other stakeholders, is to ensure that Ugandans are informed, Ugandans are given capacity to participate. And many associations. So what I would want to encourage the viewers to do is to look out for the services that are available that they can participate in, the goods that they can produce and supply. Because this crude is real, it is there. The development is going to happen. An investment of between $16 billion to about $20 billion, which is almost 3/4 of our GDP, is going to be made in this country in the next 3 to 4 years. So Ugandans must be ready to tap into this, to be able to supply this good or that service. And what we've done under the same laws is we've ring-fenced certain services and goods and said these ones will only be supplied by Ugandans.
Yeah, which one? Just 2.
I would have to, they are more than, they are 16 initially, but we've moved them to about 23. And many of them include logistics, include catering, include camps, include, there are many. You can find them on our website. We have the regulations and the laws, you can find them. But we can have another discussion here to just look at the opportunities available, so then we can list for you all these services. So what I encourage Ugandans to do, go out, look for these services, establish companies, form joint ventures with the foreigners who have more experience in these areas, and bid and compete for this work.
Okay.
And as UNOC, PAU, and other partners and the ministry, we are happy to support Ugandans in basic things like how do you prepare a bid? How do you lay out your office to meet the oil and gas standards so that they are able to compete? Because, for instance, safety is so important in oil and gas. If we come to your office and it's unsafe, we'll probably not be able to consider you for a job. So, and even employment of Ugandans. Ugandans must have priority. in employment. And that is for the fields development, for the development of the pipeline, for the development of the refinery, and all associated work. So there are opportunities. Let us drop the skepticism and acquire knowledge and participate.
Okay.
Yes.
Good, very optimistic picture painted. Just the challenges, Michael, as we wrap up, so that we understand. I don't want to create a picture that you're all prolific and everything is perfect. Yes, the challenges, and then we wrap this up.
I can think of three major challenges facing UNOC and maybe oil and gas in general. First is the so-called final investment decision, FID as it's known. That, as we know, has been apparently subject to a lot of delay. We're expecting that for the upstream as well as the pipeline, that FID will be taken this year. But it has been a challenge because many companies, many Ugandans have been gearing towards getting ready for that FID, but they don't exactly know when it's going to happen. But it is a very, as you can imagine, these are very large projects, huge investments, so that comes to the next challenge, which is financing. And it takes time to pull financing together. Some parts of the project are financed by equity, other parts of the project might be funded by a combination of equity and debt. And so financing of such mega projects using the project finance model is indeed a challenge. Just think about the government of Uganda's contribution to equity is going to be in the order of $700 to $750 million. This is covering the pipeline, covering the participation in the refinery, covering the participation in industrial park, in the storage terminals and so on. So these are huge sums of money. Of course, it's not expected in 1 year. We're talking about, over at least, say, 4-year time frame. But even for government, it's a challenge. How are we going to raise our equity as government? How is it going to be financed? How quickly will it be repaid? Of course, that's one of the big pluses of these types of projects. They're different to road projects. They're different to, airport infrastructure projects or even maybe not dams so much, but anything that's infrastructure related. A lot of those projects have very long payback periods. What we're doing in oil and gas tends to be much shorter. We're talking 5, 7, 8-year payback periods. They're very attractive projects in general. Also because of our location, we're a landlocked country, but we're also land linked. So we have the advantage of all these markets around us, not just our markets, but also to the west of us, DRC, to the north of us, South Sudan. That will definitely, that have a lot of demand for example, petroleum products. Just imagine that we're importing 1,300 kilometers from Mombasa, all of our petroleum products. But those same products also move another 700-800 kilometers to the west of us into DRC, into South Sudan, even as far as CAR from Mombasa. So you can imagine the costs involved in that. And so if we now create an industry around a resource that we're sitting on top of, we can make become very competitive with these imports. Let's start there, and that will definitely be to the benefit of all in terms of also security of supply and the like. One last challenging area, of course, is that we're talking about fossil fuels. So we've also signed on to the Paris, what's it called, the Paris Accord. Paris Accord protocol, and so we're looking at high levels of CO2 emissions, but these can be balanced in other ways. You've got to look at actually most of Uganda's CO2 emissions are related to burning of biomass. 90% of our energy balance is firewood, and some part of that is charcoal. And then the balance is related to basically moving people around with petroleum products.
So you think the market forces are not going to get us in a difficult position whereby we anticipate that we'll get lots of revenues, but by the time you get to churn out oil, the market system or the international system that has a certain repulsion against carbon emissions through oil or fossil fuels is very intense.
What I was trying to say there is, as an example, we use each of the litres of petroleum products that come into Uganda have themselves, by just the nature of their transport from the Middle East or from India, have also emitted huge quantities of CO2 emissions. I think the calculations we've done are in the order of 100,000 metric tons a year just related to Uganda's imports. The refinery itself will be emitting in the order of 600,000 metric tons per annum of CO2, but that same refinery could be in Uganda, or it could be in the Middle East. So really what we're trying to do is show that this project, we're putting it here, we no longer require the emissions elsewhere in the world. It'll be here, but we've also reduced by 100,000. So there are ways of looking at this that actually can be financed and become quite attractive to that market, that lobby that's pushing for reduction in carbon emissions. The other thing I should mention is one of our petroleum products that will come out will be gas, LPG. We are trying, government has a policy to try and move the population across to gas as opposed to using charcoal or firewood. And certainly there'll be a focus on urban centres initially, but that has a huge potential to help us manage our CO2 emissions. It will help us manage deforestation. We're losing forest at an alarming rate in this country, and we really need to be, taking heed of the warnings that come with that. Climate change, flooding, all kinds of issues. So I think there's other opportunities that will come out. And lastly, I want to mention this future state of electric vehicles that we read about. I mean, of course, from a Ugandan perspective, we think we're going to be driving petrol-driven cars or diesel-driven cars for a long time. And other parts of the world, maybe at some point, will catch up with where the US or wherever wants to go. But in reality, whatever we're doing with our oil, you've got to understand that when you go into petrochemicals, when you go into plastics, when you go into this area, all those electric vehicles need those products. So you don't necessarily have to burn your oil resource. You can actually convert it into very useful products that would be part of that future, electric vehicles. And I think in Uganda we already have a company called Chira.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's just the beginning. But there's lots of other opportunities that
okay. And I guess those challenges, you have strategies that are supposed to either manage them or mitigate them in the future. So just finally, 2 minutes, Peter. You know, when you hear all this investment pumping and of course the digging of the ground, the consortium building, it sounds like a mirage, a far distant prospect to have this oil be on ground. So give us a timeline. When do we have a retail output of refined oil on the market? And maybe also the other aspect, what is the lifespan of this particular treasure that we have?
Thank you. Let me start with the upstream. Michael has talked about final investment decision. When that is taken, construction will start. Real work will start. What you call digging of the fields. Yes, that will start. And upstream, an investment of up to $8 billion will be cleared by that final investment decision, and it will be implemented. In a space for the upstream, we are looking at 2022. As when the first barrels will be produced, what we call first oil, so we are expectant. We are sure that will happen. Looking at the negotiations of the commercial agreements, clearing of all the issues that need to be cleared before FID is taken, I think we will achieve it this year. And once it's achieved and taken, by 2022 we should have first oil. Now, because we need the pipeline to transport it. The pipeline will take FID at the same time, final investment decision at the same time, or within the same range of time. And it will also be ready by the time we produce the first barrel to ship the crude to Tanga. So that's a timeline for upstream and for the pipeline. In terms of the refinery, Michael has already spoken about it. We have the refinery is at the stage of front-end engineering and design, FEED, which we think will be we have a timeline of completion as this year. So after that, we shall take final investment decision for the refinery, and we think by the end of 2023, we should have a refinery that is operational, that is ready to receive the crude and to produce the products that we shall be using as consumers for our cars and for our homes and for for various purposes.
Yeah, and we shall hold
So
you accountable.
those are the
to UNOC,
timelines, and
yes.
what we'll do and what we'll commit as UNOC is to
Yes.
keep the public updated on what is happening.
Okay, just lastly, if all this is done and we have the oil getting out of the ground and on the market, how long, what lifespan does that oil have,
Okay,
based on
thank you.
estimations?
So what we have right now is that the crude that is available will be produced for probably up to 40 years. But we have to look at what the fields eventually produce. But the estimations and the studies that have been done, based on studies that have been done elsewhere, indicate that we should be able to have that resource for 40 years.
2060, 2065,
Yes,
around
but
there.
we're working on an aggressive exploration campaign, so we shall add more volumes, which will take the period further than 40 years.
Okay,
Yes.
Michael and Mike, let me get the names right. Michael Mugerwa, General Manager, UNOC. Peter Muliisa, Chief Legal Officer, UNOC. It's been a great pleasure indeed having you here. You've been profoundly informative.
Thank you, Baldwin, and thank you, viewers.
I'm looking forward to having you again.
Thank you.
Thanks our viewers for keeping with us this late night. We are your informative #1 station, NTV, and we urge you, if you're out there as a ministry, as a department, as an agency, or an NGO, a corporate company, come, let's talk, have a framing of a discussion that is very contentful, which is very helpful for the building of the nation. I'm Karagaba, Baldwins. Have a great night.